It all comes down to this: editing. Before we begin, a quick disclaimer. This is just how I do things. I am a writer first, and I'll always put my efforts there before learning all the ins and outs of audio editing and sound design. I know professional audio engineers who are always chasing and refining a sound. And I do get it. To a degree, I do it as well. But I already put 40 to 60 hours into each episode of Not About Lumberjacks, and sometimes even more, so done for me is better than perfect. That said, the show sounds good, and this is how I get there. The first thing I do is duplicate the main narration file in case something goes wrong. I'll always have it to fall back on. Then I bring the file into Adobe Audition and get to work. First, I run Audition's declicker to clear up most of those little mouth clicks. These kinds of sounds. I have other plugins to clean up things like that, but like I said, I'm not chasing perfect, so I find what Audition has works for me. After that, I run a de-esser to take the edge off of some of those harsh S sounds. I already have this set, but if you need to learn how to do it, there are plenty of tutorials out there. Now it's time to get to amplitude statistics. Why? Because it gives me an average RMS. RMS means root mean squared, and I can't tell you at all about what that means, but I can tell you what's important for me in this step is seeing the average RMS level. Once I have that, I open Audition's Dynamics feature and compress the file and apply a noise gate. I used to compress everything to 3, but it sounded too crunchy for me, so to get that more just natural narration sound, I go at 2.5. So, what's compression? This could be a video unto its own, but I'll explain it like this. Compression takes the loudest parts of a file and makes them quieter, and brings the quiet parts up. Not equal, but enough that if a character whispers, you hear them. This makes it easier to hear, especially in a car or in an open office. I then add a little makeup gain, volume, and that's all I do with compression. The noise gate takes all sound below a threshold and drops it from the recording. A good example of what it drops out, things like maybe a slight chair squeak or rustling fabric. The noise gate drops that while letting everything above the threshold through. And this is where the average RMS number comes in. I don't just add the average RMS and call it done. I use it as a starting point, and then I just kind of do some little adjustments. I let the audio play and make sure there are no harsh cuts when I stop speaking. When that's done, I set the file's loudness to -16 LUFS, which is just a podcast standard for loudness. It stands for Loudness Units Full Scale, and again, it's a bit too involved to explain in depth right here. But you know how commercials used to be louder on TV? Yeah, that was them making them deliberately louder than what you were watching to get your attention. Keeping a show close to -16 LUFS means if someone listens to multiple shows, the loudness is the same episode to episode, so there's no reason to adjust volume. Some people might notice I did nothing with an equalizer. I used to, but again, it sounded too much like that big radio voice. And that's not great for narration. Also, EQ is where you can fall into a hole of always tinkering, And I realized there were little differences between episodes when I messed with it, so I stopped chasing that altogether. I already get good sound from the treated space where I record, and that matters even more than anything I could do in post-production. Now that the main file is processed, it's finally time to get to editing. Remember in the narration video how I made markers when I messed up a take? Here's where that comes in so handy. Working back to front, I click the last marker in my list, and that brings me to the good take. What's in front of that marker is the bad take, or even takes, depending how much of a problem I was having with a line. I highlight the bad take or takes, delete things, and then move on to the next marker. Before using markers, I spent probably 4, maybe 6 hours going through and removing all my bad takes, but now I can get it done in 30 to 45 minutes. Next, I clear all the gaps in my narration. I hate this part of the process. It can take a day or two to work to mask my dyslexia and make it sound like I can read out loud without an issue. Once that's done, it's time to knock down the volume on my breaths. Breaths are important in narration because we subconsciously expect them, but they can be kind of harsh. So, lowering the volume appeases our brain while not being jarring for the listening experience. No matter how careful I am while narrating, I always have a smattering of plosives in a recording. Plosives are that p wind sound hitting the microphone diaphragm, but they could also be rumbles that come with other vocal combinations. To reduce the harshness, I highlight them and then I apply a filter to tone things down. The last thing I do before adding sound effects and music is listen to the entire narration track with frequency mapping on. Frequency mapping gives a visual representation of what your voice is doing, and it's here where I can catch any sound that should be silence, or any clicks the declicker missed. If that happens, Audition makes it easy to clean up. Using the healing tool, I find the click, draw over it, et voila, it's done. The multitrack session is where an episode all comes together. I name tracks and begin bringing elements in. Each episode begins with the sound of an axe chopping wood, and then the theme music comes in. I lower the volume there and begin the narration. I want to make one thing perfectly clear. This show is not about lumberjacks. I add music and effects throughout until it's all done. And when it's done, I export the file as an MP3, add metadata, and the episode is finally ready for release. I'll cover how I get stories online next time. Hey, if you like this video, I'd appreciate it if you gave it a thumbs up or go listen to a story at nolumberjacks.com. And if you missed the first or last video in this series, they should be right here.